It is New Year's 1941, and a good many of America's 133 million souls are toasting what they hope will be a prosperous 12 months ahead. These are generally good times in America. The average annual income is just over $2,300. Mortgage rates are less than 5%, and a loaf of bread can be bought for a dime. But there are rumblings on the horizon. Much of the world is at war with the Axis powers in Europe, and the United States is finding isolationism to be an attitude more difficult to maintain with each passing day. Some feel U.S. involvement in the war is inevitable. Seattle becomes the first U.S. city to hold blackout tests of emergency preparedness in the event of war. And civilian workers in many industries are now required to undergo periodic gas mask drills. The U.S. Army in 1941 stages a number of events which proudly show off America's armed forces' readiness. Still, near the end of the year, there is time to focus on the holidays. Thousands line the streets in New York for the traditional Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. To be envied are those fortunate military personnel doing their tours of active duty in paradise. In Honolulu, the military presence is pervasive and accepted, and life on the tiny Hawaiian Islands is at a perpetually unhurried pace. Then, on a quiet, sun-bleached early December Sunday morning, at the home of the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor, without warning, all hell breaks loose.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
I remember looking out our window, we could see out over Pearl, and it appeared that the dive bombers were in just a nice, lazy orbit, and one pilot would say to another, well, I'll take that one, and he'd peel off and dive, climb back up into the orbit.
We were sleeping in the shop, and as I came out of the hatch door to go down to take a shower with a towel, I looked up and I saw this plane coming in there. I said, the Marines get up early, what's going on? Then the thing banked and it was a big red ball as the Marines held.
Just before I got to the head, I heard airplanes and a lot of racket. So I went out on deck to see what was happening, and the first thing I seen was a big red meatball on a Japanese airplane. And guns was firing all around, which never fire in port. And right then and there, I knew what was happening.
Early in the morning, about 7 o'clock, I went to our mess hall to have coffee. And we had planned a fishing trip for the day. And as I left the mess hall going back to the barracks, I noticed the Japanese planes flying over. And but we thought there was maneuvers like most everyone else. And there was not real until I watched the plane drop a bomb on Wheeler Field, which was next to us, seen the explosion and seen the fire from the explosion, and then we began to think that it was real. And we could see the pilot real good. He flew right over the top of it, flying real low.
As I came up and I heard the planes coming in and looked up to the north, and it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe that those red circles were on those planes. We would thought there was a drill with the Army or Air Force or whatever, Navy, you know. So it was totally unexpected.
And then we walked up and looked up the harbor, that direction, up that channel. I see an airplane coming down there, and I said, the Army's playing games early Sunday morning. And one kid who was with me said, yeah, they sure are. And I said, wait a minute, the Army doesn't have any torpedo planes. That's a fish under the bird. And then he dropped the torpedo, and it went into Oklahoma. He swung over and came back this way and strafed us.
I couldn't imagine why we were having so much fire, because everything was flooded below decks, but the fire had started in some of the combustible compartments, I guess, and spread from there with ammunition and fuel.
All during the attack, and we fought the Japs off with whatever we had. We had lots of guns and lots of ammunition, but no gun mounts. There was nothing to put the guns on. The mounts were in the planes, and the planes were on fire and burning up. And very shortly, the planes were all on fire because the Japanese were using much incendiary ammunition.
Now, I don't know whether they saw me or what, but I could see the bullets coming right by me. They'd spraying dust up in my face. That's how close it came. And I just expecting to be hit at any time, but it never happened.
I saw the planes coming from north, out of the window on the west end of the building there. They were coming down. It was 4 in a group. And I looked out there and saw them red moons on the side of them, and I knew they weren't ours. They were belonging to somebody else.
At 10 minutes to 8, I was in the latrine in the officers, bachelor officers' quarters, and it overlooks the flight line. Now I was looking down at the flight line, and I saw this plane dive down and pull up, and an object dropped from this plane, and then all of a sudden a great big orange blossom flame came up, and when this plane pulled up, I saw these 2 meatballs on its wing, and knew immediately it was a Japanese aircraft.
Just came out of the mess hall from having breakfast, and somebody said, well, look, the Navy's having target practice. And due to an old sergeant that looked at the sky, and he said, fellas, that's not target practice, that's a real McCoy.
I could see the Jap planes coming in, and they hovered right over our quarter deck right there, and they tore our flag to shreds. It was in shreds. We had to immediately, some of the personnel had to cut down the canopy. Everybody had canopies up on the battleships, and all the cruisers, and everybody had canopies. Had to immediately cut them down in order to see the enemy.
But we got the second hit, then it kind of knocked us around. So I neatly folded my clothes up, put them back in the locker, went up topside and looked out over the channel, and I saw the torpedo planes coming in, dropping their torpedoes. And as they would heel over, you could see the red ball, the rising sun. So we knew it was no drill. And the ship didn't even call general quarters for probably 3 or 4 minutes. Everything was confusion, total chaos.
I remember exactly when I first heard the news about Pearl Harbor. I was 17 years old, walking across the green at school, and my thoughts in those days didn't turn to world events, mainly to simpler things, more mundane things, like making the basketball team or entering college. And that walk across the campus marked an end of innocence for me. And when Americans heard the news, they froze in shock. But just as quickly, we came together.
A half-century after an event that changed history forever, thousands of Americans and others came together again as the eyes of the world focused on the 50th anniversary of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The first week in December of 1991, survivors of that day so long ago, their friends and family, as well as those who just wanted to experience history, came to Honolulu and to Pearl Harbor. It was a time to tell grandchildren about what happened here.
And they just completely destroyed those two ships. And then the Shaw was over the floating dry dock right over here, and just blew its bow completely off.
And it was a time to pay tribute to more than 2,400 Americans who fell that day.
On this day, we remember with gratitude. Those who died in defense of Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941.
Not surprisingly, emotions surfaced easily and unashamedly.
I don't think that you could go on and continue your life if you let it consume you. But there are times when I go to a survivor's funeral that would bring back of those memories. There are times when I just recently attended my brother's funeral, and he was a World War II veteran, and it brings back those emotions like they're doing now.
There were a number of ironies surrounding the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941. Though the United States had long before broken the Japanese diplomatic code, messages which might have indicated that an attack was imminent were either misinterpreted, dismissed, or, as on December 7th, delivered too late to have prevented the attack. Then there was the widely held and obviously mistaken belief that due to its remote location, the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet was invulnerable to attack from Japan. In fact, the Japanese Armada had traveled several thousand miles for almost 2 weeks, undetected in a stormy Pacific Ocean, and positioned themselves just north of Oahu before launching hundreds of planes in the surprise attack. Perhaps the ultimate irony was the fact that at an isolated observation position on the North Shore, 2 young Army privates saw a large image on a new piece of surveillance equipment called radar. Unknowingly, they were eyewitnesses to the unfolding of the U.S. entrance into World War II.
We had actually gone up to the unit late afternoon on Saturday before, stayed up there, and so that we would be available to open up the equipment at 4 a.m.
We were told to shut down at 0654 from the information center at Fort Shafter, and we shut down at 0654. But the point was that we had prearranged permission to operate beyond 7 a.m. so that I could get further instructions on the operation of the scope.
George Elliott was a new man with the organization. He transferred from the Air Corps, and he needed to be trained on the equipment. So we decided that he could get some training that morning. We continued to operate. I was getting ready to give him instruction when this large indication appeared on the oscilloscope.
We went back on the air at my insistence, and while he was teaching me to operate the scope, we picked up this enemy flight that was coming in. We didn't know, of course, that it was an enemy flight, but we picked up a large blip at 137 miles. Now, we had never received anything of that kind on the radar scope before. Now, Lockhart thought the set was out of kilter, so he double-checked the readings and so forth, and we found that it was a flight coming in.
Normally, an aircraft would appear as a spike on a baseline, anywhere from an eighth to half to maybe 3/4 of an inch high. But this particular indication was as big as an island. It was maybe an eighth of an inch wide, and it went clear to the top of the screen. Obviously, it was something very big. It was the largest thing I'd ever seen on the scope.
After plotting the incoming movement of whatever was on their radar screen, George Elliott says he insisted their observation be called back to the information center at Fort Shafter near Pearl Harbor. A young lieutenant, Kermit A. Tyler, eventually took the call.
About 7:15, I had a call from Lockhart, Private Lockhart at the Opana radar station, saying that it was the largest plot he'd ever seen. Well, I had previous information that indicated there would be a flight of B-17s come in, and I felt very strongly that this was the flight of B-17s because he had no chance of seeing anything that large before then, and so I said, don't worry about it, it's okay.
And Lieutenant Tyler and I talked on the phone. I told him what we had seen, the size, how unusual, and the direction it was coming from, and stressed this with him, but he didn't tell us this, but he was aware that there were going to be B-17s coming in that day, and he thought that that's what they were. So he told us not to worry about it. But we continued to track it and plot it up until we lost it in the interference from the topography behind the antenna, which was about 20 miles away from the island.
So apparently what happened was that the planes between that 15 and 25 mile period, distance away from the shore, must have split up to the left and to the right. The right going in and striking Kaneohe Bay, and the left striking Pearl Harbor.
The terrain on the north shore of Oahu is much the same as it was 50 years ago. The windswept hill at Opana Point has also changed little from being the remote, off-limits government site that it was on that December day. While commercial development has forever altered much of the island, this spot can still imbue to a visitor the sense of history, the sense of irony that it played in the events of a half-century ago. The attack could not have been stopped, but it's difficult to stand here and not think, what if the radar operators had known for sure what they were seeing?
I think fate just thrust me into that position, and it could have been, I had several pilots tell me later, well, they didn't, they said, well, I would have done the same thing, speaking of themselves, because I just happened to fall into place there. I was actually scheduled to come on Saturday noon, and someone changed the schedule at the last minute and said, well, don't come now, come Sunday. This is a fateful thing, I must say, you see.
Well, of course, I'm aware that it is one of the footnotes in history. I think it's one of those intriguing situations everybody always wants to play what if with, and they do this. We actually didn't find out about the attack until we got back to our base camp, which was at Kauailoa, about 5 or 6 miles down the coast. We were told then that we had been attacked. Of course, as soon as we heard that, we knew what we had seen was the approaching first wave of the attack.
George Elliott has held some bitterness through the years about how he feels history has treated his role in the attack. He says many times the story is told as though there was only one radar operator on duty, and the credit always goes to Joseph Lockhart. Still, for this camera, and for the first time in 50 years, these three key players agreed to meet and cordially relive their unique experience. More than 2 generations later, these survivors of the day, like most, find it hard to believe, but easy to remember.
Utter devastation, that was obvious. How do you describe something like that? I couldn't put words to it. It's unreal. I think you feel it, is this really happening? It's kind of unreal.
The utter devastation of the attack on Pearl Harbor and surrounding installations on the island of Oahu was due, of course, to the total surprise element by the Japanese forces. Still, there were countless acts of heroism once resistance began by U.S. naval personnel. Many were accorded medals and citations for their actions in the days and weeks that followed the attack. 13 individuals received their nation's highest tribute, the Congressional Medal of Honor. Of those 13, only 2 survived. One is Navy Captain Donald K. Ross, who was a machinist on the USS Nevada. Aboard the only ship to get underway during the attack, Machinist Ross ordered his men topside to escape the heat and smoke below. Then he, single-handedly, performed their duties. At the 50th anniversary ceremonies, he introduced George Bush in one of several speeches the president made. Now retired, Captain Ross remembers the single greatest legacy the attack on Pearl Harbor leaves.
My message is, we've got peace, but let's keep ourselves safe. Remember Pearl Harbor and remain alert, but let's have peace with it. Let's try to keep from fighting, but let's be ready if we have to.
The serene view of the Kaneohe Naval Station today belies the fury of the attack on December 7, 1941. It was here, in the midst of battle, that Chief Navy Ordnanceman John W. Finn manned a machine gun during most of the attack from an exposed position and held that position. Though severely wounded several times, he continued to fight until he was ordered to seek medical attention. He, too, was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Any man in charge, a petty officer in charge, a chief or whatever, there's hundreds, dozens of other things to do, which I did. I'd go in and out of my armory, give orders to guys and men, and I was not cool, calm, and collected. I was screaming and hollering and so damn mad I didn't know what to do because of us getting caught that way. When I got to the hangar, what I did was just do the things that I knew best to do and what I'd been trained to do and what I was being paid to do. It was man these machine guns and fight the Japs off as best we could. I manned the gun from a completely exposed section of a parking ramp, I think they called it, and with complete disregard for my own safety, I manned that gun and shot at the attacking Jap planes. And of course I continued this up. As long as there was a plane, I could see one, I'm out there shooting. I was pretty busy shooting at planes right there. I didn't have time to go sightseeing, but other people said that some of the planes that attacked Kaneohe Bay were shot down or whatever happened to them, that they went down. So we were accused of, credited, we'll say, of shooting down 3 planes there during that attack. But one of them, actually, I know, it hit the base, landed there, the plane and the pilot's body were recovered.
Not all the heroics at Kaneohe Bay on December 7th were on the ground. Drama also filled the skies as a few courageous American pilots were able to get their fighters airborne and at least attempt to blunt the effectiveness of the second wave of attacking Japanese planes. Second Lieutenant Philip Rasmussen was one of but a handful of pilots who got in the air.
We got further instructions to go to Kaneohe Bay. That Kaneohe Bay was under attack. And as we climbed over the clouds that cover the Kula mountain range there, we had to climb to about 9,500 feet in order to get above the clouds. And we got over Kaneohe Bay and we spotted these, I believe it was about 8 Japanese aircraft below us at about 6,500 feet, preparing for another pass onto Kaneohe Bay. And we dove down on them, and as we dove down, we broke up individually. We were not flying formation any longer. We were in the process of trying to engage each of us trying to engage an aircraft. And I came up underneath one, not totally underneath, but about a 45-degree angle. And as he came across in front of me, from my right to my left, I let the 50 caliber slide in, and it started firing all by itself. And I could see the bullets starting at the engine and just about every 3 feet going down the fuselage of the airplane. And he started to smoke and peel down. And just at that time, I suddenly saw this aircraft coming right at me. It looked like it was about 10 feet away from me, and he looked like he was going to ram me. And I pulled up tightly, and at that time, I was hit by another Zero, and he really clobbered my airplane. He shot everything up except me and my engine, fortunately. My canopy was shot off, my tail wheel was shot off, my rudder cable was severed, and my hydraulics were severed, and there are bullets on both sides of my catwalk of the cockpit.
The exploits of Rasmussen's airborne encounter over Kaneohe Bay have been captured in a limited edition print, taken from an original painting by artist Jerry Crandall. Rasmussen, who had jumped into his plane dressed only in his pajamas, flew his disabled aircraft back toward Wheeler Field. Passing over Schofield Barracks, he was fired upon by American forces who had mistaken him for the enemy. The shots missed, and he made an out-of-control landing back at Wheeler.
I shakily got out of that airplane, and my pajamas were pretty well soaked, and it wasn't just from sweat. And I looked over the aircraft, and then I said, well, I'm going back and get my flying suit on. So I walked back to the back to the hangar line, and then up to my bachelor officer's quarters, and I put on a flight suit and came back down to the line again. Apparently, that was the end. That was the end of the attacks by the Japs. No more Jap aircraft came over and attacked the field. The next day, Lou Sanders and I started to count the bullet holes in my airplane, and I got to 450 holes, and he found over 500 holes in the plane.
For their heroics, Rasmussen and a number of his fellow pilots were decorated in the days and weeks following the attack on December 7th. While the main target of both the first and second waves of Japanese aircraft was Pearl Harbor and the ships that lay at anchor there, the attack force also hit several other key military targets in addition to Kaneohe. At Bellows Field, on the east side of the island, Private Earl Bigelow saw planes from the second wave descend on the airfield.
While I was in the barracks picking up my gas mask, the second attack started. I picked up my rifle and my 20 rounds of ammunition, and I went right out in the street in front of the barracks, there in the wide open street, and I fired at those planes. I managed to get about 12 rounds off, and the attack subsided, maybe ceased entirely, and somebody next to the barracks that I never saw, just heard him, said, "Take cover." Well, before he said that, I was out there because I was mad. I mean, I was angry as I could be, ready to kill me some Jap pilots.
Those Japanese pilots, while attacking Bellows and surrounding areas, had also singled out one of the B-17s arriving from the mainland. It was forced into a crash landing at Bellows.
On December 7th, that morning after breakfast, I went out for a pre-flight on my aircraft. I was a crew chief on the 047s, and we got the aircraft ready for a dawn patrol that we were flying at the time. So after I got through pre-flighting, they had an emergency landing of a B-17, and we had never had any B-17s there, so I just kept watching, and here it comes, and landing in the wrong direction. So I just watched it, and then went down after it landed. I noticed they pulled up the gear so they could stop at the end of the runway, because it was one of the shortest runways on the island, I think. We went down and got the 17, tried to help them out.
and we saw 2 zeros following it in. I didn't know it was a zero at the time, but I knew it was not one of our aircraft. So after we saw the red dot on the side of the airplane, I said, something's wrong here.
There was more wrong that day than was immediately apparent. The beach near Bellows Field now as then draws military dependents and others on a sunny afternoon to play in the warm Pacific waters. But 50 years earlier to the day from this scene, another facet of the attack on December 7th occurred. One of 5 miniature 2-man Japanese submarines was beached on the shore here. The ill-fated sub was a part of one of the few failures the Japanese suffered that day.
We didn't see it the next morning, but during the day they spotted it out on the reef. And several phone calls later, they just trying to find out what it was, and in fact we had never seen any before. Then they saw a man at the conning tower, and somebody dropped either a bomb or something on it to break it loose from the reef. It was stuck on the coral reef, and he came toward the beach. So after 3 or 4 hours work, we got a cable hooked up to it to pull it in on the beach to see what it was. There was one Japanese man in it, and he came up through the conning tower with his hands up. They took him in on the beach and pulled the sub in on the beach.
The captured sub later toured most of the United States to aid in savings bond drives during the remainder of the war. The sub's commander, Kazuo Sakamaki, was the only survivor of the 10 Japanese sailors manning the 5 midget subs that day. Because his government considered his capture to be a disgrace, his image was omitted from any later Japanese reference to the crews, and officially, he ceased to exist. This is Schofield Barracks today. Located roughly in the middle of Oahu Island, Schofield was one of the initial targets of the first wave of attacking Japanese aircraft. Though Schofield was the largest U.S. Army post at the outset of World War II, it was not bombed during the attack, but rather was strafed by Japanese planes. Very little actual damage was incurred at Schofield, but that wasn't much comfort to those who experienced the attack firsthand.
To everyone I knew, it was a complete surprise. We didn't think there would be any chance of the Japanese coming to attack. I was focused more on what I should be doing at that time, and so everybody within an hour, I guess, was at their duty, whatever their duty was.
At nearby Wheeler Field, immediately south of Schofield, it was a different story. Flight lines and hangars were repeatedly bombed and strafed. The attacking Japanese knew they had to get as many land-based fighters as they could to blunt a possible retaliation after the attack at Pearl. Unwittingly, the Americans had made it easy for them.
And our aircraft were all lined up wingtip to wingtip on the apron in front of the hangar line. And we had assembled the aircraft there for the regular weekly Saturday morning inspection. And generally, we would disperse the aircraft in earthen revetments surrounding the airfield. But we didn't this time. Even though we were under the reason why we didn't was because we were under an anti-sabotage alert, which required manpower protecting the water stations, the power stations, and they just apparently didn't have enough manpower to also protect our airplanes when they were sticked out there in the revetment in the perimeter of the field.
The Japanese do not know just how many planes they destroyed that day, and I am not going to tell them.
What the president wouldn't say publicly soon became known. Of more than 150 aircraft at Wheeler during the attack, well over half were destroyed on the ground, and at least 36 Americans were killed. Today, Wheeler's flight line is home to aircraft of another era. Helicopters sit where 50 years earlier, devastation had reigned from above. The greatest loss of American life beyond the actual attack at Pearl Harbor was at Hickam Field nearby. There, more than 120 people were killed, and 2.5 times that many were wounded, as the Japanese unleashed their raid that Sunday morning. Hangars were heavily bombed and machine gunned, and many aircraft, including at least one B-17, were burned and destroyed as they sat on the tarmac. A substantial number of the dead were killed in or near the barracks at Hickam. Beyond the barracks, an oil depot fell to Japanese bombs, and smoke rising from the unrelenting attack on Battleship Row at Pearl could be seen rising from beyond Hickam's officers' quarters. Stunned military personnel gathered in an open area in front of the aircrew barracks at Hickam to view the carnage. But through it all, a photographer caught evidence that the American flag had survived the attack, providing no doubt inspiration to all who lived through this moment in history. The focal point of Hickam Field was then, and is now, a water tower that was spared any damage from attacking planes. Some feel the Japanese pilots may have thought the tower was a church and avoided it as a target. Other graphic reminders of the December 7th attack remain, however. Since that day, pictures have captured pockmarked concrete walls on the side of the heavily damaged Hale Makai barracks. Today, those same blemishes, caused by machine gun fire from strafing Japanese aircraft, bear mute testimony to the violence that took place here long ago. Hickam Field today is a place of quiet military activity, seemingly long removed from an event that changed the world forever. One widely witnessed moment of the attack on Pearl Harbor was the explosion of the destroyer USS Shaw as the vessel sat in a floating dry dock. Fires from burning fuel tanks ignited forward ammunition stores, and the ship's bow blew off in a spectacular explosion. Seaman Roland Harding claims he is the sailor standing on Ford Island looking toward the Shaw when she blew up, in perhaps one of the most famous U.S. Navy photos of the attack.
I heard this explosion. I turned around and looked, and I saw this big ball of fire, and I knew what was over there because my car was about 300 yards from there, and I was kind of concerned about my automobile because it wasn't a brand new one, but it was transportation. And it's something I don't think I'll ever forget, seeing that ball of fire go up.
Japanese photographs of the opening moments of the attack on Pearl Harbor reveal a Ford Island that is tranquil and with little activity on a Sunday morning. But geysers of water from exploding bombs and torpedoes already signal what will happen in the coming minutes along Battleship Row adjacent to Ford Island. The island itself sustained heavy damage during the attack. At least half of the planes on Ford Island's Luke Field, along with several hangars, were completely destroyed. Debris from the sunken and heavily damaged battleships coated the area around Ford Island for days. A view of the island from the water tower at Luke Field the day after the attack showed widespread damage and fires still burning along Battleship Row. Today, that water tower, which also was used as an air traffic control tower, stands sentinel over an airfield whose operations were long ago transferred to nearby Hickam Field. On the side of the island opposite Battleship Row lies a memorial to the USS Utah, bombed and capsized early in the attack on Pearl Harbor. It is widely believed that pilots of the Japanese attack force mistakenly thought the Utah was a carrier. In fact, she had been serving as a target ship for military maneuvers. Almost 6 sailors died when the Utah fell. Ford Island is of limited military use today, and much of it lies hauntingly silent, far removed in time from that day when America was caught with its guard down. This captured Japanese photo of the American battleships at their moorings shows what a compact target the attacking pilots had. Shooting fish in a barrel is perhaps an apt description.
We didn't realize exactly what was happening at the beginning. The first drill we had was a way to fire and rescue party, which was a good call from the OD because on a Sunday morning, that's the most likely thing to happen. One of our own planes would crash into the ship as they tried to land at Ford Island. And then later we got the general quarters signal. But my battle station was the same place for all drills, so I was in the engine room when the damage started pile up.
I just got up there and they started strafing. And so we started back down looking for cover, and they sound general quarters. My general quarters station, battle station, was in damage control, third deck down, right behind the armor plate. And I had the sound-powered phones, which I report any damage to my sector of the ship. And I never was able to plug it. Every time I start to plug it in the socket there, well, a torpedo would hit and knock me down. So
we had an inspection the previous Friday. All ammunition had been removed and taken down to the magazines.
Those of you with ticket number 12.
From that time on, most of us started fighting fire, taking care of the injured. And finally, they probably 20 minutes, they called abandoned ship. So I was up forward, took my shoes off, put them in the scuppers, climbed down the anchor, and dove over the side. Swam to Ford Island.
Miraculously, as the West Virginia settled to the bottom of Pearl Harbor, her fantail colors continued to fly. Though the West Virginia was mortally wounded, she was lashed by cable and hemp rope to the USS Tennessee, which was moored between the West Virginia and Ford Island.
My battle station was first shell went on a 5-inch 51 broadside. Of course, that was right next to port side, right next to the West Virginia. So the West Virginia took most of our bombs in the action. Took those torpedoes, and she was tied to us with 2 cables and some very big, large hemp lines. And I just want to believe that being tied to us kept her from capsizing, as the Oklahoma did.
The USS Oklahoma sustained massive damage during the initial stages of the attack and was one of 2 battleships which never resumed action during World War II. More than 400 sailors lost their lives on the Oklahoma that day, but many survived the attack, only to be trapped below the capsized ship for up to 2 weeks. Rescue operations saved some, but not all. The surprise element of the attacking Japanese forces gave them valuable time to wreak havoc on the fleet without resistance from American forces. But as the realization became known, so did the will to fight back.
And then they called out for emergency for the landing party, and I had been assigned to the landing party. And I reported to the quarterdeck, picked up my rifle, my 30 M rifle, and reported out on the dock, and we were actually standing on the dock firing at the Jap planes as they were coming in with the rifles.
We went across to Ford Island and to the air raid shelter there, and then we come out and we watched the Nevada get underway. I guess it was 50, 100. I was standing on the beach there, watched it, and we really cheered when it got underway because it was the only ship in the bunch there that had enough guts to get moving.
45 minutes into the attack on Pearl Harbor, after sustaining major damage, the USS Nevada managed to get underway and move from Battleship Row under her own power, the only ship to do so.
Well, I don't think they really thought she could get underway. I mean, she did get her power up fast, and she
pulled away from the Fox there, Fox 8, and got out. And the quartermaster that took her out was one of the ones that had all this in mind, I guess. That he knew what was going on. Some of them were killed on top. We had, I think there was one or two from the forecastle, and some was killed with the delayed action, the bomb that hit on the one of the casemates and went down about 5 or 6 decks, and some on the fantail, and one's up in the bird bath.
Under power and heading for open sea, the Nevada became a prime target as Japanese pilots attempted to sink her, thereby blocking the entrance to the harbor. The commanding officer avoided that possibility by intentionally running the Nevada aground.
They hit her so hard she was sinking, so they pushed her over against Hospital Point over there. Pushed her over against Hospital Point over there so she wouldn't block the harbor when she went down. Well, I helped man a gun on there, and I helped fight fires.
Well, I was up on the old one deck on my gun station on a 3-inch 50, and out of the corner of my eye I could see the plane coming in, dropping a torpedo, and all of a sudden hell broke loose on the Arizona, and I saw the explosion.
If anything personifies the rallying cry, "Remember Pearl Harbor," it is the death of the battleship Arizona and more than 1,100 sailors on board, almost half the total number who died during the December 7th attack.
Well, this decided number 4, fighting a fire back there when she blew and she wiped me clear off the ship. I ended up on the water, and I swam over and got aboard the Nevada, and I was on her when she down the harbor, got sunk out there. So I guess I'm probably the only one, if not, I think the only one that ever got 2 battleships sunk off them under 2 hours.
We lost all lights, all power. But in a few minutes, and then we smelled smoke. After smelled smoke, we knew it was time to leave. And we come up, and we were on the port side of the ship, this side, and went up across the ship to the starboard side and stepped in the water and swam to Fort Island. And the water was just starting to lap over the quarterdeck when we left.
Launched in 1915 at an initial cost of $7.5 million, the Arizona had enjoyed a grand career on the high seas for a quarter of a century. But on December 7th, she came into the sights of a young Japanese pilot named Zenji Abe, who had flown his dive bomber off the decks of the carrier Akagi about 2 hours before. Abe, along with his fellow pilots, had trained for the mission for a year and a half.
First target for the dive bomber group of the second wave was the American aircraft carrier. Enterprise and the Accident. Then they were out of our range. So order came to attack the battleships alongside the Fort Island.
The devastation of the USS Arizona was quick and complete. Of more than 1,500 men on board, fewer than 350 survived the blast from a forward magazine containing more than 1 million pounds of explosives. The moment of her death was dramatically captured in a painting by maritime artist Tom Freeman, realistically portraying the violent end to the Arizona. It was apparent that salvage of the Arizona was impossible. Later, her superstructure was removed and the site was declared a cemetery, leaving to rest for all time those still entombed below. In 1962, a permanent memorial was erected, spanning but not touching the Arizona. The memorial's designer was Alfred Price.
The sagging shows weakness, unpreparedness, defeat. And out of the defeat, ultimately, on both sides, in a more muscular way, we are rising to ultimate victory. That was basically the interpretation.
And it is in their name that I salute the men of Arizona and all others who served and sacrificed on that fateful day. In the hearts and mind of those who still serve, they will never, never be forgotten.
On the 50th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack, a week-long series of events culminated with sunrise services at the Punch Bowl National Cemetery of the Pacific, and later observances on the Arizona Memorial and nearby Kilo 8 Pier. It was a time to remember the contributions made by those who had died on December 7.
Within hours after the cruel surprise attack began, many died, having done what came naturally. They fought for their family and friends, defending the land they loved, and they did not set out to become heroes, but they did.
On behalf of all chapters, the president of the Texas chapter of the Survivors Association presented a one-of-a-kind bronze and marble memorial plaque.
The inscription says at the top of it, in the ribbon at the top, it says, "We the survivors remember." And then in the shield below the eagle, it says, "You who gallantly fell, we shall never forget."
In the harbor, the aging battleship Missouri, on whose deck the war ended, dropped anchor near the spot where it began. A fitting symbol, perhaps, of a world whose ideologies have come full circle in a half-century. 50 years when many things changed, and yet many stayed the same. A time to simply say, thank you to those who fell.
Americans lived and died true to their ideals. They have prepared the way for a world of unprecedented freedom and cooperation. And thank God you Pearl Harbor survivors are here today to see this come to pass.